The Yugoslav Federation, which consisted of 6 republics including Bosnia, collapsed in 1991. Bosnia declared its independence in 1992, but this move was opposed by ethnic Serbs who wanted to remain part of Yugoslavia. This tension ultimately triggered the Bosnian War. The dark reality of the Bosnian War that raged from 1992 to 1995. The ethnic and religious conflicts following the collapse of Yugoslavia turned this region into a slaughterhouse overnight. Thousands of lives were lost, and women were forced to survive unimaginable horrors. Our story begins in the early 1990s in Sarajevo, the capital city of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Throughout the narrative, the focus is on a young girl named Samira, who was born and raised in that city. On that particular day, Samira said goodbye to her family. She decided to go to Srebrenica, a remote village in Bosnia and Herzegovina, to serve as a volunteer teacher. After a long and exhausting journey, Samira finally arrived at her destination. But from her very first step into the village, she felt something different. Cold, foreign, and completely opposite to the life she knew back in Sarajevo. Shortly after, Samira began touring the village. She checked out the places that would be part of her daily routine, from the primary school where she would teach to the small 2-story house she would live in. From her bedroom window, Samira watched a bus slowly leaving the village. The bus that had just brought her here was now gone, leaving Samira all alone in an unfamiliar place. After getting through her first day as a volunteer teacher, Samira spent time with her students, playing on a small hill near the village. Right there, an uncomfortable feeling crept in when Samira noticed plumes of smoke and heard explosions coming from the neighboring village. She rushed to contact her family in Sarajevo, but the call went unanswered. As the anxiety grew heavier, Samira decided to write a letter. That next morning felt different for Samira. Loud noises from outside forced her awake. The sight of armed men right outside her window made her realize that something terrible was happening. Not long after, a long-haired man burst in. He forced Samira out to gather with the rest of the villagers. By firing several warning shots into the air, they successfully herded Samira and the other locals into an empty building. They were then split into 2 groups based on gender. The women were forced to stay inside the building, while the men were ordered out. And at that exact moment, it was the last time those men were ever seen alive. Outside, they were lined up and shot dead one by one. The remaining women were then packed into buses and driven to the middle of nowhere. After a grueling trip, they arrived at a location with a large hangar, which became their temporary detention camp. Exhausted from the long journey, everyone tried to rest using whatever basic supplies they could find. The next morning, deprived of proper food and decent resting conditions, the elderly women quickly fell ill. With only one medical worker on site and extremely limited supplies, there wasn't much help available for these prisoners of war. They took turns leaving the hangar just to use the restroom and wash their faces. On another occasion, Samira noticed several women being moved to an unknown location. Realizing that her good looks could put her in serious danger, Samira started wearing a hijab and stayed close to a little girl, hoping to be mistaken for a mother. But her disguise came too late because she had already been marked by the militants from day one. While trying to comfort herself with her friends, Samira was suddenly called out by a soldier and taken to a room.
Hide! Da ti pomognem. Dobra mala.
There, she was forced to face 3 high-ranking officers of the faction. No words could come out of her mouth. Only raw terror filled every single second. Samira had no choice but to submit, holding back her inner breakdown while mourning her fate in this cruel injustice. After that incident, Samira was moved to a room shared with a little girl and 4 other women. Even though they now received slightly better shelter and food than before, the paralyzing fear never truly went away. Samira lived in constant anxiety, knowing that the nightmare could repeat itself at any moment. One day, the only little girl in Samira's room was taken away by one of the guards. Filled with suspicion, Samira could only watch her leave, praying she would return safely. But Samira's worst fears came true the next day. The little girl returned in horrific condition, suffering from severe injuries on her back. After receiving basic care from Samira, the poor girl drew her last breath. Fueled by deep rage and grief, Samira planned to fight back in her own way. Her roommates were confused as to why Samira suddenly started putting on makeup and dressing up, looking strikingly out of place among the captive women. Their curiosity was answered when Samira was summoned to the camp leader's quarters. The captain was intrigued by Samira's boldness, dressing up while being a prisoner of war. Wearing the only dress she owned, Samira was escorted by a guard to the captain's quarters. She knew exactly what was about to happen, yet she forced herself to stay calm. After they finished dinner, the captain began treating Samira as his personal property. This dynamic continued repeatedly over the following days. From then on, no other soldier dared to touch Samira, not because she was safe, but because she had become the captain's mistress. That was her real reason for grooming and taking care of herself. She set a bitter goal: to be under the control of one high-ranking officer rather than facing abuse from dozens of brutal soldiers. For her, it wasn't a choice. It was the ultimate survival tactic in a situation with absolutely no way out. Samira also used this position to help her roommates. She secretly saved food from the captain's quarters and shared it with the other women, showing a shred of humanity in a place stripped of it. From a distance, they watched the armed militants carrying lifeless bodies out of the hangar. The sight struck terror into everyone's hearts, the constant fear that one day it would be their turn to be carried out, never to return.
Остановите.
Eventually, official military forces arrived to crack down on the local militia operating in the area. Suddenly, Samira and her friends were ordered to pack up. Without much explanation, they were herded onto a bus to be transferred elsewhere. But right before departure, Samira was pulled from the crowd. She was told to meet the captain one last time for a farewell. After informing her that the war in their country was finally over, the captain handed Samira a sum of money to help her on her journey.
Иди пригни, що се придомисли. Хайде. Чекай!
During the Bosnian War, Samira and her companions were held captive by Bosnian Serb forces who rejected the full recognition of the Bosnian state. Ethnic and religious differences severely escalated the conflict. As a result, the war erupted and claimed the lives of thousands of Bosnian Muslims. Thousands of young men were executed, while women and children became victims of systemic violence and detention. The Bosnian War lasted from 1992 to 1995. Through a peace agreement in 1995, the war ended, leaving behind a dark history that no one ever wanted. Long story short, Samira and the other survivors returned to their respective hometowns. It was only then that Samira realized she was pregnant. Her wish to terminate the pregnancy was denied by the doctor. Like it or not, Samira had to carry the pregnancy to term for the remaining months. In fact, after giving birth, Samira fully intended to abandon the baby. But the moment she looked at the innocent child, her heart instantly melted at the sight of her own flesh and blood. She began nursing her baby, tears rolling down her face, carrying a heavy mix of guilt and maternal love. Samira in this film does not represent a single historical individual, but rather a fictional composite character built from the real testimonies of Bosnian War survivors. Although her name is fictional, everything Samira went through, from her capture in the remote village to her time in the detention camp, is a direct mirror of the tragedy experienced by thousands of women during the conflict. So, while Samira herself is fictional, the events are entirely rooted in real, brutal history.